Some stories find us when we least expect them. This one came to me from an old journal, discovered in a forgotten trunk in Arizona. Its pages yellowed and brittle with age. It told of a man who had given up on living, and a woman who refused to let him. I share it now because I believe we all carry seasons of silence within us, times when we stop speaking to God, to others, even to ourselves, and sometimes it takes a stranger's courage to remind us that our hearts are still beating. This is a story of smoke and salvation, set in the wild mountains of the Arizona Territory in 1884. The axe bit deep into the pine. Silas Weaver yanked the blade free, swung again, and stopped mid-arc. Black smoke, a thick column of it rising from the valley below, curling against the pale autumn sky like something alive. He lowered the axe, watched the smoke for 3 breaths. 4, not his concern. He turned back to the half-felled tree, raised the axe. His shoulders burned from the morning's work, and the sun hung low enough to tell him supper was an hour away. Beans again, coffee, silence. The smoke kept rising. Silas set the axe head against the dirt. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 11 days, hadn't wanted to. The cabin in that valley belonged to old Emmett Pruitt, a trapper who came through twice a year and never stayed long. But Pruitt wasn't due until December. The smoke thickened, turned blacker. Silas wiped his palms on his trousers. His boots moved before his mind decided down the ridge, through the scrub oak, toward whatever was burning below. If you're watching from somewhere quiet tonight, I'd be grateful to hear where home is for you. There's comfort in knowing we're not alone in this world. Drop a word in the comments, and let's sit together a while. The slope dropped steeper than Silas remembered. Loose shale slid beneath his boots, and he caught himself on a juniper branch. The bark rough against his palm. Below, the smoke had turned from black to gray, shot through with orange sparks that drifted upward. He smelled it now. Burning pine, burning cloth. Something else underneath kerosene. Maybe. The sharp chemical bite of it. The cabin came into view through the trees. Flames licked up the west wall, crawling toward the sod roof. The single window glowed orange from inside. And then he saw her. A face behind the glass, dark eyes, hands pressed flat against the pane, fingers splayed. She was not screaming. She was not pounding. She simply watched him approach, her expression as still as pond water. Silas's legs moved faster. He crashed through the brush, branches whipping his forearms, and reached the cabin's front. The door was shut. An iron bar had been wedged through the handle and driven into the frame, barred from the outside. His chest tightened. He gripped the bar and pulled. Rust bit into his fingers. The metal groaned, but held. Inside, the fire's roar had grown louder, a hungry, breathing sound. The axe. He shifted his grip, measured the distance, and swung. The blade caught the door frame 6 inches from the hinges. Wood splintered. He swung again. His shoulders screamed. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The door gave. Smoke poured out, thick and choking. Silas ducked low, one arm across his face, and pushed inside. The heat pressed against his skin like a living thing. Through the haze, he found her crouched in the far corner, a torn calico dress hanging loose on her frame. Apache, young, maybe mid-20s. Rope burns circled both wrists. Raw and weeping. He grabbed her arm. "Come on." She did not resist, did not speak. She moved with him toward the door as the roof above them groaned a deep, settling sound that meant the timbers were failing. They stumbled out into the open air. Silas pulled her 20 feet from the cabin before his legs gave out. He bent double, coughing smoke from his lungs. When he looked up, she was not watching him. She was watching the tree line behind him. Her body had gone rigid, her breath shallow and quick. "Before dark," she said. "They come back." Silas straightened. The coughing fit had left his throat raw, and he spat black phlegm into the dirt. Behind him, the cabin's roof caved inward with a groan and a shower of sparks. Heat washed over his back. The woman had not moved. She stood 10 feet away, her bare feet planted in the dust, her eyes fixed on the ridge to the east. "Before dark," she said again. Her voice was low, steady, no panic in it. "They come back." Silas wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His shirt was singed at the collar, and the skin beneath stung where embers had found their way through. He looked at her, really looked. The calico dress was too large, cut for a white woman with wider hips. Her hair hung loose past her shoulders, tangled and matted with ash. The rope burns on her wrists had scabbed over in places, but fresh blood seeped where the skin had cracked. Days old, those wounds, maybe a week. "That ain't my trouble," he said. She did not argue, did not plead. Her gaze shifted from the ridge to his face, and she studied him the way a person might study a horse before deciding whether to trust it. Silas turned toward the slope he had descended. His cabin was 1.5 miles up the mountain. Beans and coffee waited. Silence waited. The life he had built small, empty, safe waited. "How many?" The words left his mouth before he could stop them. "3, she said. "Maybe 4 now." He closed his eyes, opened them. The smoke from the cabin had thinned enough that he could see the far ridge clearly. Nothing moved there yet, but the sun was dropping fast, and shadows were pooling in the low places. "Who are they?" "Croft's men." She said the name like it tasted of something rotten. "Harlan Croft. He owns the Copper King mine. He owns the sheriffs. He owns the judges." Silas knew the name. Everyone on the rim knew it. Croft had made his fortune pulling copper out of the earth, and he spent that fortune making sure no one told him no. "And you?" Her jaw tightened. "My uncle sold me, 2 seasons ago, horses and whiskey. That was the price." The words hit him like a fist to the chest. He had heard stories everyone had, but hearing it spoken aloud, in that flat and matter-of-fact voice, made his stomach turn. "The fire," he said. "They set it. I ran 3 days ago. They found me this morning." She gestured toward the burning cabin without looking at it. "They did not want to chase me again." So they had locked her inside and set the place ablaze. Let the fire do what their patience would not. Silas's hands curled into fists at his side. He forced them open. This was not his fight. He had come to this mountain to disappear, to become no one, to owe nothing to anyone. A sound reached him from the east, faint but unmistakable, hoofbeats. The woman heard it too. Her body went still, every muscle taut. Silas looked up the slope toward his cabin, then down toward the approaching sound. 3 riders, maybe 4, and they would reach the burned cabin within minutes. They would find footprints in the ash. They would follow. He moved before the thought finished forming. This way. He grabbed her arm, gentler than before, and pulled her toward the tree line. "Stay low. Don't talk." She did not resist. She matched his pace, her bare feet silent on the pine needles where his boots crunched and scraped. They climbed for 10 minutes, weaving through juniper and scrub oak, until they reached a narrow creek that cut across the mountainside. Silas stopped. "Drink if you need to. We won't stop again until we're higher." She knelt at the water's edge and cupped her hands. The creek ran cold and clear over smooth stones. As she drank, her sleeves fell back, and Silas saw the full extent of the damage, not just the wrists, but bruises running up her forearms, yellow at the edges where older ones were fading. He looked away. When he glanced back, she was watching him. Her hands still dripped water. Her eyes held no accusation, no plea, just recognition. She had seen him look away. She understood what it meant. Neither of them spoke. Silas rose and started up the slope again. She followed. They reached his cabin as the last light drained from the sky. The single-room structure sat in a clearing, surrounded by ponderosa pines. Its log walls chinked with mud and moss. A thin trail of smoke rose from the iron stovepipe he had left. Coals banked that morning. He stopped at the door. His hand rested on the latch. For 3 years, no one had crossed this threshold but him. The silence inside was his. The ghosts were his. The photograph turned face down on the shelf. The wooden rattle on the high ledge. The quilt folded at the foot of the bed that Clara had stitched with her own hands. All of it was his. And his alone. Opening this door meant opening all of it. The woman stood behind him. She did not ask to come in. She did not demand shelter. She simply waited, her breath visible in the cooling air. Silas thought of the riders below. By now they would have found the tracks leading away from the burned cabin. By now they would be climbing. He lifted the latch. "Inside," he said. "There's a root cellar under the floor. If they come tonight, that's where you hide." She stepped past him into the cabin. Her eyes moved across the sparse interior. The rope frame bed, the iron stove, the shelf with its face-down photograph, and settled on nothing. Silas followed her in and barred the door behind them. Outside, the darkness deepened. Somewhere below, hooves struck stone. They were still climbing. The hoofbeats faded sometime after midnight. Silas sat with his back against the cabin wall. His rifle across his knees, the kerosene lamp had burned low, casting weak orange light across the floor. Outside, the wind moved through the ponderosas with a sound like rushing water. The woman she had not given her name, and he had not asked, lay on his bed, not sleeping. He could tell by her breathing, the shallow and uneven rhythm of someone listening for danger. Neither of them spoke. Silas watched the door. The bar held firm, a thick oak beam he had cut and shaped himself 3 winters ago. It would take more than one man to break through, but Croft had more than one man. Toward dawn, the woman's breathing finally deepened. Silas's head drooped, jerked up, drooped again. He caught himself before sleep could pull him under. The first gray light seeped through the gaps in the shutters. He rose, his joints stiff and aching from the night on the hard floor, and crossed to the window. Through the slats, he saw nothing but trees and mist, no riders, no movement. They had given up for the night. They would be back. He turned. The woman was awake, watching him from the bed. The quilt, Clara's quilt, the one she had stitched during the long winter before their wedding, was pulled up to her chin. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. "They're gone," he said. "For now." She sat up slowly, pushing the quilt aside. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if she were cataloging her own injuries with each motion. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and planted her bare feet on the plank floor. "I can walk," she said. "If you want me to go," Silas shook his head. "They'll be watching the trails. You go out there alone. They'll have you before noon." He crossed to the iron stove and opened the firebox. The coals from yesterday had died to ash. He fed in kindling, then larger pieces of split pine, and coaxed a flame to life. The stove ticked and pinged as the metal expanded. "There's water in the bucket," he said without turning. "Ladle's on the hook." He heard her move the soft pad of her feet, the creak of the bucket handle. When he glanced back, she was drinking from the ladle, her throat working as she swallowed. Water dripped from her chin onto the front of her dress. That dress. It did not belong to her. Someone had put her in it, the way you might dress a doll. Silas looked away. He found the coffee tin on the shelf and measured grounds into the pot. The routine steadied him fill the pot from the bucket. Set it on the stove, wait for the water to boil. He had done this 10,000 times in this cabin, but always alone. The woman moved past him. Her shoulder nearly brushed his arm, and he stepped back. She did not seem to notice. She had found the small canvas sack of piñon nuts he kept near the flour tin, and she held it up with a questioning look. "For the coffee," she said. "My mother made it this way." Silas shrugged. "Go ahead." She cracked the nuts between her teeth, extracted the pale meat, and dropped the pieces into the heating water. The smell that rose from the pot was different, richer, earthier than anything Silas had made in 3 years. "Your mother," he said. "She's still living?" "No." The woman did not look up. "Fever. 2 winters past." Silas thought of the word fever and what it meant to him. The way Clara's skin had burned beneath his palm, the way their son's tiny chest had risen and fallen, and then stopped. He said nothing. The coffee boiled. The woman found 2 tin cups on the shelf. He only owned 2, and he had not used the second in years and poured. She handed one to him. Their fingers did not touch. Silas drank. The piñon gave the coffee a sweetness he had not expected. He drank again. "What's your name?" The question came out rougher than he intended. "Kaya." "Silas." He gestured vaguely at the cabin around them. "Silas Weaver." She nodded once, as if the name confirmed something she had already guessed. Then her eyes moved across the room, the sparse furnishings, the tools hanging from pegs, the shelf with its face-down photograph, and stopped. Silas's throat tightened. He watched her gaze linger on the photograph, watched her hand rise toward it. His own hand shot out, then stopped. Kaya's fingers hovered an inch from the frame. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither moved. Slowly, she lowered her hand. "Some things stay where they are put," she said quietly. The words hung between them. Silas released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "You should eat something," he said. "There's bacon, beans." "I eat. I work." She set down her cup. "What needs doing?" He almost argued, almost told her to rest, to stay in bed, to let her wounds heal. But the look on her face stopped him. She was not asking for permission. She was stating terms. "There's wood to split," he said finally. "Out back, but your wrists. I can grind corn. I can cook." She held up her hands, palms out, showing the raw and weeping skin. "These will heal." Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Fair enough." The morning passed in fragments. Silas returned to his work outside. There was always wood to cut, always timber to haul, while Kaya moved through the cabin's interior. When he came back for the noon meal, he found the floor swept, the bedding aired on the porch rail, and a pot of beans simmering on the stove. She had found the corn and the grinding stone. A small pile of yellow meal sat on a cloth beside the stove, ready for mixing. Silas ate standing up, spooning beans from a tin plate. Kea sat on the edge of the bed and ate from another. Neither spoke. When he finished, he set his plate on the table and noticed his hand. A cut ran across his left palm, fresh, from the morning's work. The axe handle had slipped, and the blade had caught him. He had not bothered to clean it. Kaya was beside him before he could protest. She took his hand and turned it toward the light from the window, examining the wound with the same calm focus she brought to everything. "Water," she said, "and cloth. It's nothing. Dirt in a cut becomes poison in the blood." She did not let go of his hand. "Water, cloth." He pointed to the bucket and the rag hanging beside it. She retrieved both, then returned and began to clean the wound. Her fingers were cool against his skin. The water stung, and he hissed through his teeth. "You do not take care," she said. "Ain't been a priority." She looked up at him then. Her eyes held something he could not name, not pity, not judgment, something closer to recognition. She finished cleaning the cut and wrapped it with a strip of cloth torn from the rag. Her movements were efficient, practiced, the work of someone trained to heal. "Your mother taught you this," Silas said. "Yes." "She was a healer. Among my people." "Yes." Kaya tied off the bandage and released his hand. "I carry what she knew." Silas flexed his fingers. The bandage held firm. On the shelf behind him, the photograph lay face down where it had always been. Her eyes moved to it again. She had noticed it that morning. And again now, but she did not reach for it. She had seen his reaction. She would not reach for it again. The afternoon stretched long and silent. They moved around each other in the small cabin, finding rhythms that kept them from colliding. He brought in wood. She prepared food. He mended a tear in his shirt. She cleaned the wounds on her own wrists, applying a paste made from plants she had gathered near the creek. As the sun began to drop, Silas stood at the window and watched the trees. A sound reached him from below, faint, distant. Horses on the lower trail. Kaya appeared beside him. She had heard it too. "They search in daylight now," she said. Silas's hand found the rifle leaning against the wall. His fingers curled around the stock. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Silence. Then a man's voice, carrying up through the trees, too far away to make out words, but close enough to hear the tone. They were giving orders. They were spreading out. The riders did not find them. Silas watched from the window as the voices faded. Moving east along the lower trail, they had come within a quarter-mile of the cabin, close enough that he could smell their horses on the wind, but the terrain had worked in his favor. The ridge above his clearing blocked the view from below, and the game trail that led to his door was overgrown enough to look like nothing more than a deer path. By nightfall, the mountain had gone quiet again. 5 days passed. On the morning of the 6th day, Silas stood at the edge of the clearing and watched Kaya walk the perimeter of his land. She moved slowly, deliberately, pausing at certain plants and ignoring others. When she returned, her hands were full of leaves and roots he did not recognize. "This one stops bleeding." She held up a cluster of small green leaves. "This one fights fever." A gnarled root, pale and fibrous. "This one." She showed him a sprig of purple flowers. "Poison. The tea brings sleep that does not end." Silas looked at the purple flowers for a long moment. Good to know which is which. Yes. She wrapped the plants in a scrap of cloth and carried them inside. When Silas followed, he found her arranging them on the shelf near the stove, sorting them by purpose. His cabin, which had held only his belongings for 3 years, now held hers too. The sight of it, the drying herbs, the second cup on the table, the moccasins she had fashioned from an old piece of leather, made something shift in his chest. He turned away and went back outside. The crosscut saw hung on pegs against the cabin's east wall. Silas lifted it down and carried it to the stand of ponderosa pines he had been working before the fire. The half-felled tree from that day still leaned against its neighbor, waiting to be finished. He set the saw against the trunk and began to work alone. The blade bit into the wood, throwing sawdust with each stroke. His shoulders burned. His arms ached. But the rhythm of it, push, pull, push, pull, settled his mind the way nothing else could. Footsteps behind him. He did not turn. Kaya appeared on the opposite side of the saw. She gripped the handle without asking permission, without waiting for instruction. Her bandaged wrists flexed as she tested the weight. "I can help," she said. "Your wrists are healing." She pulled the saw toward her, and the blade slid through the wood. "Show me the rhythm." Silas hesitated. Then he pushed the saw back. She pulled. He pushed. The first few strokes were ragged, out of sync, the blade binding in the cut. But she adjusted quickly, watching his shoulders, matching his pace, and within a dozen strokes, they had found it. The rhythm, push and pull, breath and motion. Two bodies moving as one. They worked without speaking. The sun climbed higher, sawdust piled at their feet. When the tree finally groaned and toppled, crashing through the underbrush with a sound like thunder, Kaya stepped back and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Ponderosa," she said, gesturing at the fallen trunk. Silas's mouth twitched. "Say that again." "Ponderosa." She frowned. "That is not right. Close enough." The twitch became something else, something he had not felt in 3 years. The corner of his mouth lifted. Kaya bent down, picked up a pine cone from the ground, and threw it at his chest. It bounced off his shirt and landed in the sawdust. "You laugh," she said. "Don't get used to it." Too late. They returned to the cabin as the afternoon shadows lengthened. Kaya prepared the evening meal beans and cornbread made from the meal she had ground, while Silas examined the cabinet beside the stove. The hinge had been broken for 2 years, maybe longer. He had stopped noticing it. But now, with her moving through the space, the broken hinge seemed to announce itself. He found his tools and set to work. The repair took longer than it should have. The screws were rusted, the wood soft with age. But when he finished, the cabinet door swung smoothly on its hinge for the first time since Clara had been alive. He stood back and looked at it. Such a small thing. From behind him came a sound he did not recognize, low, melodic, wordless. He turned and found Kaya at the grinding stone, working more corn into meal, and the sound was coming from her throat. A song, an Apache melody, rising and falling in patterns that held no words he knew, but carried something else entirely. Silas stood motionless. The song filled the cabin, filled the spaces between the logs and the gaps in the shutters. When she finished, the silence that followed was different from the silence that had come before. "Your mother sang that," he said. "Yes. What does it mean?" Kaya was quiet for a moment. "It is a song for grinding corn, for the work of women. My mother sang it every morning." She set down the grinding stone. "I did not sing it for 2 winters. I thought I had forgotten." Silas understood. There were things he had not done for 3 years. Things he thought he had forgotten. "Clara," he said. The name hung in the air between them. Kaya did not ask who Clara was. She waited. My wife. Silas's voice came out rough, scraped raw by the word. She died. 3 years ago. Fever took her. Took our son, too. He was 6 months old. Kaya set aside the bowl of cornmeal. She did not move toward him. She did not offer comfort. She simply sat, her hands folded in her lap, and listened. I wasn't there, Silas said. When it happened, I was working a ranch 2 days' ride south. By the time I got word, by the time I got back, he stopped, swallowed. They were already in the ground. The silence stretched. Outside, a hawk cried somewhere over the ridge. My mother died holding my hand, Kaya said quietly. I was there. I watched her go. She paused. It did not help. Silas looked at her. She looked back. He nodded, once. That was enough. The next morning, a rider appeared on the trail below the cabin. Silas saw him first, an old man on a gray mule, his beard stained yellow with tobacco, a battered felt hat pulled low over his eyes. He knew the man, Old Dutch, a trapper who worked the high country every autumn, following the beaver runs and selling pelts in Payson when the season ended. Silas met him at the edge of the clearing. Dutch. Weaver. The old man's eyes moved past Silas to the cabin. The door stood open. Inside, Kaya was visible near the stove. Didn't know you had company. Passing through, Silas said. Dutch's gaze lingered on the moccasins drying on the porch rail, on the second cup sitting on the table inside, on the herbs hanging from the rafters that had not been there the last time he passed through. Passing through, Dutch repeated. His tone carried no judgment, but something flickered in his eyes. You need water, Silas asked. Creek's running clear. Much obliged. Dutch climbed down from the mule and led it toward the creek. He did not look back at the cabin, but Silas could feel the questions forming in the old man's mind. When Dutch rode off an hour later, Silas stood in the clearing and watched him disappear down the trail. Kaya appeared beside him. He will talk, she said. It was not a question. Silas thought of the taverns in Payson, the trading posts along the rim, the places where Puwatan gathered and shared news. Old Dutch was not a malicious man, but he was a talker, always had been. Yeah, Silas said. He will. The question now was who would hear him and how long before that news reached Harlan Croft. 2 days after Old Dutch rode out. The messenger came. Silas heard the horse before he saw it, a single rider, moving slow, picking his way up the overgrown trail that led to the cabin. He set down the axe and reached for the rifle leaning against the woodpile. Kaya appeared in the cabin doorway. Her face had gone still, her body tense. Stay inside, Silas said. The rider emerged from the tree line. Not one of Croft's men, Silas could tell that much from the clothes. This one wore a town suit, dusty from the trail but cut from decent cloth. A derby hat sat crooked on his head. He carried no weapon that Silas could see, just a leather satchel slung across his chest. The man reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the clearing. His eyes moved from Silas to the cabin, to the rifle, back to Silas. Mr. Weaver. Silas did not lower the rifle. Who's asking? Name's Tolliver. I carry messages for folks who pay me to carry them. The man reached slowly into his satchel, keeping his movements visible, deliberate, and withdrew an envelope. Cream-colored paper, sealed with red wax. Got a letter for you, from Mr. Harlan Croft. The name landed like a stone, dropped into still water. I don't know any Croft, Silas said. He knows you. Tolliver held out the envelope. Old trapper came through Payson 4 days back. Dutch, they called him. Talked about a lumberjack up on the rim. Said you had company. Apache woman. He said, young thing with rope burns on her wrists. Silas's jaw tightened. Behind him, he heard Kaya's sharp intake of breath. Mr. Croft was very interested in that story. Tolliver continued. He asked me to deliver this personally. He waggled the envelope. I'm just the messenger. Mr. Weaver, I don't care what's in it. I don't care what you do with it. I just get paid to make sure it reaches your hand. Silas crossed the clearing in 4 strides and snatched the envelope from Tolliver's fingers. The paper was heavy, expensive. The wax seal bore an imprint, a pickaxe crossed with a mountain. The mark of the Copper King mine. You can go now, Silas said. Tolliver tipped his derby. Pleasure doing business. He turned his horse and started back down the trail. At the tree line, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. Word of advice. Mr. Weaver, free of charge. Mr. Croft doesn't like waiting. Whatever's in that letter, I'd read it quick and answer quicker. Then he was gone, swallowed by the trees. Silas stood in the clearing, the envelope heavy in his hand. The wax seal stared up at him like a red eye. Kaya emerged from the cabin. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at the letter. Open it, she said. Silas broke the seal. The paper inside was covered in neat, angular handwriting, the penmanship of a man who had hired tutors to teach him how to look educated. He read the first line, the second. His hands began to shake. What does it say? Kaya asked. Silas read aloud. Mr. Weaver, I am told you have something that belongs to me. The Apache woman is my property. Purchased fair and legal, 2 seasons past. I am a reasonable man. Return her to my men in Payson within 3 days, and I will pay you $500 in gold coin for your trouble. Refuse, and I will come for her myself. I have 30 men who ride when I tell them to ride. I have judges who rule when I tell them to rule. You are one man in a cabin on a mountain. Consider your position carefully. The letter was signed with a single word. Croft. Silas's fingers curled around the paper. He walked to the fire pit, where the morning's coals still smoldered, and dropped the letter onto the embers. The cream-colored paper caught, curled, blackened. The red wax seal melted and bubbled. Within seconds, nothing remained but ash. $500, Kaya said quietly. I don't want his money. That is not what I meant. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. $500 is more than most men see in 5 years. He will not believe you refused. He will think you are bargaining. He will send men. Silas looked at her. The late afternoon sun caught her face, illuminating the sharp angles of her cheekbones. The dark depth of her eyes, the bruises on her arms had faded to yellow. The rope burns on her wrists had scabbed over and begun to heal. Let him send them, Silas said. That night, Silas lay on the floor with his back against the wall, the rifle across his knees. The fire in the stove had burned low, and shadows filled the cabin's corners. Through the gaps in the shutters, he could see stars cold, distant, indifferent. A sound from the bed. Movement. He turned his head and saw Kaya sitting up, pushing aside the quilt. What are you doing? She did not answer. She rose and crossed to the corner where her few possessions sat, the moccasins she had made, the herbs she had gathered, the torn calico dress she had arrived in. She began to gather them. Silas got to his feet. Kaya, I bring death to your door. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. If I leave now, If I go into the mountains where they cannot find me, you can tell them I ran. Tell them you woke and I was gone. They will have no reason to harm you. And where will you go? Away. She stuffed the herbs into the folds of the dress. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently. There are places in the high country where no white man goes. I know how to find food. I know how to survive. For how long winter's coming? You'll freeze before Christmas. That is my concern, not yours. Silas moved to the door and stood in front of it. Not blocking her with his body, she could push past him if she chose, but placing himself between her and the exit. Move, she said. No. Her eyes flashed. You do not own me. I know that. Then why? She stepped closer, her chin lifted, her gaze boring into his. Why do you care what happens to me? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. 3 weeks ago, you would have let that cabin burn without leaving your ridge. Why are you standing in my way now? The question hung in the air between them. Silas searched for an answer, a reason, an explanation, something that made sense and found nothing. Just a hollow space where logic should have been. I don't know, he said. That is not a reason. It's the only one I got. Kaya stared at him. Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Her hands, still clutching the bundled dress, had begun to tremble. You will die for me, she said. Is that what you want? No. Silas shook his head slowly. But I ain't gonna let you die for me either. The silence stretched. Outside, an owl called somewhere in the darkness. The fire in the stove popped and settled. You ain't property, Silas said. Man who thinks you are, he's wrong. The law says different. Then we find a different law. Kaya's grip on the bundle loosened. What do you mean? There's a man in Payson, Silas said. Marshal Hoke. He's old, and he's tired, but he's honest. I knew him when I worked the ranches south of here. He doesn't take money from Croft. He doesn't take money from anyone. Kaya's brow furrowed. One honest lawman against 30 riders. Federal law, Silas said. Hoke told me once buying and selling people has been illegal since the war. It ain't usually simple, but Croft got greedy. He put it in writing. That's what'll hang him. If we get to Hoke, if we make this a federal matter, Croft's paper won't be worth the match it takes to burn it. Kaya was quiet for a long moment. Then she set the bundle down on the table. You believe this will work? I believe it's better than dying on a mountain. She looked at him, really looked, her eyes searching his face for something she could trust. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once. When do we leave? First light. Silas stepped away from the door. Get some sleep. It's a hard day's ride to Payson, and Croft's men will be watching the trails. Kaya returned to the bed. She lay down, but did not close her eyes. She watched Silas cross to his place against the wall and settle back onto the floor. Silas, she said. He looked up. Thank you. He did not know how to answer that, so he said nothing. He simply nodded, the way she had nodded, and turned his gaze to the door. Outside, the wind had picked up. It rattled the shutters and moaned through the gaps in the logs, somewhere below the cabin. Far down the mountain, a coyote began to howl, one voice at first, then two, then half a dozen, their cries rising and falling in the darkness. Silas listened. The coyotes were not hunting. They were calling to each other, gathering. He checked the rifle's load and settled in to wait for dawn. They left the cabin before the first gray light touched the sky. Silas led the mule by its halter, picking his way through the darkness by memory and feel. Kaya walked behind, her hand resting on the mule's flank to keep contact. The animal's hooves struck stone with sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. The main trail to Payson dropped south from the ridge, winding through open meadows and gentle slopes. It was the easy route, the route any sensible traveler would take. Croft's men would be waiting there. So Silas turned east, toward the rim path, a narrow track that hugged the edge of the Mogollon escarpment, dropping 1,000 feet on one side to the valley floor below. He had walked it twice in 3 years, both times in full daylight. Walking it in darkness was something else entirely. The ground beneath his boots changed from packed earth to loose shale. He slowed, testing each step before committing his weight. Behind him, the mule balked, its hooves scraping and sliding. Silas tugged the halter and spoke low, meaningless sounds meant to calm. "Wait." Kaya's voice came from behind him. "This is wrong." Silas stopped. "What?" "The path. It turns here. You are walking toward the edge." He could not see it. The darkness was absolute. No moon. The stars, hidden behind a layer of cloud that had rolled in after midnight. He reached out with his free hand and felt nothing but empty air. His stomach dropped. "How do you know?" he asked. "I smell the juniper." Kaya moved past him, her bare feet silent on the rock. "The path goes through a stand of them. They are to the left. You were drifting right." Silas swallowed. He had been 3 steps from walking off a cliff. "Lead," he said. "I'll follow." They moved slower after that, Kaya in front, her hand occasionally reaching back to touch his chest and guide him. She navigated by smell and sound and some instinct. He did not possess the wisdom of a people who had lived in these mountains for generations before white men ever saw them. An hour passed, 2. The path grew narrower, the drop on their right more sheer. Silas kept one hand on the rock wall to his left, feeling the cold stone scrape beneath his fingers. His legs burned from the constant effort of balancing on uneven ground. Then he heard it. Voices, laughter. The sounds floated up from somewhere below, distorted by the canyon walls, but unmistakable. Kaya stopped. Silas pressed close behind her, and they stood motionless, barely breathing. A campfire flickered into view 300 feet below, a small orange glow in the darkness, surrounded by the dark shapes of men and horses. The smell of tobacco smoke drifted up, mixed with the scent of cooking meat. "Croft's men," Kaya whispered. Silas counted the shapes around the fire. 4, maybe 5. They had made camp at the base of the escarpment, right where the rim path descended to meet the valley floor. "They're blocking the bottom," he said. "We can't get past. We go around." Kaya pointed along the rim, away from the descent. "There is another way down, farther, harder, but they will not expect it." Silas looked at the path ahead, a thread of pale rock clinging to the cliff face. Barely wide enough for the mule. "How far?" 2 hours, maybe 3. The mule stamped and snorted, its breath steaming in the cold air. Below, one of the men around the campfire looked up toward the sound. Silas held his breath. The man turned back to the fire, reached for a coffee pot, poured. They moved on. The next hour was the longest of Silas's life. The path grew worse sections where rainwater had carved channels in the rock, other sections where the edge had crumbled away entirely, leaving gaps they had to jump. The mule refused to jump. Silas had to blindfold it with his bandana and lead it across, step by careful step, feeling the animal tremble beneath his hands. Then the shale gave way. One moment, Silas had solid ground beneath his boots. The next, the rock was sliding, cascading down the slope in a rattling rush that sounded like thunder in the silence. His hand shot out, caught a root jutting from the rock face, and his fall slowed just enough. He hit a ledge 10 feet below. The impact drove the air from his lungs. His ribs screamed. Something warm and wet spread across his side. Above him, Kaya cried out. Then she was falling too. Silas lunged, his hand closed around her wrist, and he pulled. His injured ribs shrieked in protest. He pulled harder. Kaya scrambled for purchase, her bare feet scraping against the rock, and together they crawled away from the edge. They lay side by side on the narrow ledge, gasping for breath. Above them, the mule brayed in panic, its hooves stamping somewhere in the darkness. "The mule," Kaya said. "Leave it." Silas's voice came out ragged, each word a knife in his side. "It'll find its way back, or it won't. We can't climb up to get it." Below them, the campfire still glowed. The men around it had gone quiet. One of them stood and peered up toward the rim, a silhouette against the orange light. Silas pressed himself flat against the rock. Kaya did the same. They did not breathe. They did not move. The man stared up into the darkness for a long moment. Then he shrugged, said something to his companions, and sat back down. They waited. The cold seeped into Silas's bones. The ledge was barely 6 feet wide, and the rock beneath him was wet with something dew, or the blood from his injured side, or both. His shirt clung to his skin. His hands had gone numb. Worse than the pain was the shame of it lying here helpless, unable to stand, unable to protect anyone. He had dragged her into this. He had promised her safety and delivered her to a cliff edge with men hunting below. Some protector he was, some savior. He could not even walk a mountain path without falling off it. Kaya moved closer, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "Your ribs," she said quietly. "Let me see. Can't see anything in this dark. Let me feel." She reached out, and her fingers found his side. They moved carefully across his ribs, pressing gently, testing. When she touched the spot where he had hit the ledge, Silas hissed through his teeth. "Cracked," he managed. "Bruised. Maybe cracked. I cannot tell without light." Her fingers lingered on the wound. "You are bleeding. I've had worse. You say that often, because it's often true." She withdrew her hand. They lay in silence, listening to the men below, their voices, their laughter, the crackle of their fire, so close. Close enough that Silas could smell the tobacco and the coffee and the horse sweat. Close enough that one shout would bring them running. The hours crawled past. Silas drifted in and out of a half-sleep, jerking awake each time the pain in his ribs flared. Kaya did not sleep at all. She lay beside him, her eyes open, watching the darkness. At some point, he could not say when her hand found his. Her fingers were cold, his were colder, but the contact steadied something inside him. He did not pull away. The first gray light of dawn crept across the scabot. The men below stirred, packing their gear, saddling their horses, one by one. They mounted up and rode east along the valley floor, away from the rim, away from the path that led to Payson. They were leaving. Silas raised his head and looked down into the valley. The town was visible now, a cluster of buildings huddled against the far slope, smoke rising from chimneys. the morning sun catching the glass of windows. Payson, less than a mile away. Kaya sat up beside him. Her face was streaked with dust and dried blood from a cut on her forehead. Her dress was torn. Her hands were scraped raw from the fall. She looked at the town, then at him. "Can you walk?" Silas pushed himself upright. His ribs screamed, his legs trembled, but he got his feet beneath him and stood. "Guess we'll find out." They found a way off the ledge, a series of handholds and footholds that led down to a slope gentle enough to descend. The going was slow, painful, each step a negotiation between will and injury. Kaya stayed close, her hand on his arm, steadying him when he stumbled. By the time they reached the valley floor, Silas's shirt was soaked through with sweat and blood. His vision had begun to blur at the edges. But Payson was there, just ahead, the buildings growing larger with each step. And then Kaya stopped. She was looking at the road that led into town, at the 3 riders who had just appeared around the bend. They wore the same clothes as the men from the campfire. They carried the same rifles, and they were riding straight toward them. Silas pushed Kaya behind him. His hand went to his belt where his pistol should have been and found nothing. The gun was still in the saddlebag on the mule, somewhere up on the rim where they had lost it. The 3 riders slowed as they approached. The man in front, thick-shouldered, with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, raised his hand, and the others stopped. "Well now." The scarred man leaned forward in his saddle, studying Silas and Kaya with the lazy interest of a cat watching mice. "Mr. Croft said you might try for town. Didn't think you'd be fool enough to come down in daylight." Silas said nothing. His ribs throbbed with each breath. His legs had begun to shake from exhaustion and blood loss. Behind him, Kaya stood motionless, her hand pressed against his back. "The woman comes with us," the scarred man said. "You can walk away. Mr. Croft's got no quarrel with you, not yet. But that offer expires the moment you make this difficult." Silas still said nothing. He was calculating distances, the gap between him and the riders, the distance to the nearest building, the number of steps it would take to reach the boardwalk where an old man in a marshal's stars was just now stepping out of a doorway. The old man stopped. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip, but he did not draw. "Morning, boys," Marshal Hoke's voice carried across the street, calm and unhurried. "Something I can help you with?" The scarred man turned in his saddle. His expression shifted, not quite fear, but something close, caution. "This ain't your concern, Marshal. Private matter between Mr. Croft and this man here." "Private matter." Hoke stepped off the boardwalk and walked toward the riders. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. "Funny thing about private matters. They tend to become public when they happen in the middle of my street." Other doors had begun to open along the boardwalk, a shopkeeper in an apron, a woman in a calico dress, a child clinging to her skirts. 2 old men who had been playing checkers outside the general store, one by one. They stepped outside and watched. The scarred man's hand drifted toward his rifle. "I'm warning you." "Marshal, no." Hoke stopped 10 feet from the riders. His voice had not risen, but something in it had hardened. "I'm warning you. You're in my town. You follow my law. And my law says you don't drag people out of the street like dogs. She's property." The scarred man jerked his chin toward Kaya. "Mr. Croft has papers, legal sale, signed and witnessed. She belongs to him." "Papers?" Hoke's lip curled. "I know about Croft's papers. I know how he gets them. I know who signs them and how much he pays." He took another step forward. "I also know federal law." "You want to tell me about federal law?" Son, about what happens to men who buy and sell human beings. The scarred man's jaw tightened. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing the tension. Federal law don't apply out here, he said. This is territory business. Wrong. Hoke reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded paper. He held it up so the riders could see the seal blue wax, stamped with an eagle. Telegram came through 3 days ago, from Tucson. Federal marshals are already on their way. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Old Dutch came through here talking about a lumberjack and an Apache woman up on the rim. Talked about rope burns on her wrists. I sent word that same May Day. The second rider, younger, barely out of his teens, shifted in his saddle. His face had gone pale. Carl, he said to the scarred man, maybe we should shut up. It ain't usually this simple, Hoke continued, his eyes fixed on the scarred man. These things get tied up in territorial courts for years, but your boss got greedy. He put it in writing, signed his name to a bill of sale for a human being. That's what's gonna hang him. He folded the telegram and slipped it back into his pocket. You want to explain to federal marshals why you were kidnapping a woman in broad daylight. You want to explain that to a federal judge. The third rider was older than the other two, with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years and harder choices. He had not spoken since they arrived. Now he turned his horse, slow and deliberate, away from the confrontation. Where do you think you're going? The scarred man snapped. Home. The gray-bearded man did not look back. I didn't sign in up for federal charges. I got a wife and I got kids. I ain't hanging for Harlan Croft. You ride for Mr. Croft. You ride when he says ride. The gray-bearded man stopped his horse. He turned in the saddle and looked at the scarred man for a long moment. Something passed between them. Old debts, old loyalties, the weight of choices made and unmade. Not for this, he said quietly. Not anymore. He rode back the way he had come. The young rider watched him go, his hands trembling on the reins. He looked at the scarred man, then at the growing crowd of townsfolk, then at Marshal Hoke, standing calm and unmoved in the street. Carl, he said again. His voice cracked. I don't want to hang. He turned his horse and followed the gray-bearded man. The hoofbeats faded into the morning air. The scarred man sat alone in the street. His hand still hovered near his rifle. Silas watched that hand, watched the tendons flex and relax, flex and relax. Hoke watched it too. Just you now, son. You want to make this choice all by yourself. The scarred man's face had gone red. His eyes moved from Hoke to Silas to Kaya, to the crowd that had gathered 15 people now, maybe more, watching from the boardwalk and the doorways and the street corners. Witnesses. Too many witnesses. His hand dropped. This ain't over, he said. Mr. Croft will hear about this, all of this. And when he comes, Hoke interrupted. He can talk to the federal marshals. Now get out of my town. For a long moment, nobody moved. The scarred man stared at Hoke. Hoke stared back. The silence stretched until it seemed the air itself would crack. Then the scarred man wheeled his horse and rode. Within seconds, he had disappeared around the bend in the road. Silas's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in the dirt. His hands braced against the ground. The pain in his ribs had become a living thing, pulsing with each heartbeat. His vision narrowed to a tunnel. Kaya was beside him. Her hands found his shoulders, steadied him. Inside, Hoke said. He had crossed the distance without Silas noticing. Both of you. My office. Now." They made it to the marshal's office, a small building with barred windows and a potbelly stove that radiated heat into the cramped space. Silas collapsed onto a wooden chair. Kaya stood beside him, her hand still on his shoulder. Hoke poured water from a pitcher and handed the cup to Silas. "Drink." Silas drank. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it steadied him. "You're the lumberjack from up on the rim," Hoke said. It was not a question. "Dutch came through 4 days back. Talked about you. Talked about her." His eyes moved to Kaya. "Said you had rope burns on your wrists. Said you looked like you'd been through hard times." Kaya met his gaze. She did not speak. "I sent the telegram that same day." Hoke continued. "Figured Croft would try something. He's been pushing the edges of the law for years, but buying people—" He shook his head. "That's federal. That's beyond what any territorial judge can cover." "Why?" Silas's voice came out rough. "Why help? You don't know us." Hoke was quiet for a moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the street, where the crowd was slowly dispersing, people returning to their shops and their homes. "I've been a lawman for 32 years, he said finally. "Seen a lot of men with power use it to hurt people who couldn't fight back. Croft's the worst of them. But I could never touch him. Never had the grounds. Never had the evidence." He turned back to face them. "Now, I do." The door opened. A woman entered, the one Silas had seen on the boardwalk. The one with the child. She carried a basket covered with cloth. "Mrs. Harmon," Hoke said. I know who they are." Mrs. Harmon set the basket on the desk. "The whole town knows. The whole town saw." She looked at Kaya, and something softened in her face. "I brought food and bandages. The man's bleeding through his shirt." Kaya took the basket. "Thank you." Mrs. Harmon nodded. She lingered for a moment, studying Kaya's face, the rope burns on her wrists, the torn dress. Then she reached out and touched Kaya's hand briefly, gently. "You're safe here," she said. "Whatever happens, you're safe." She left. The door closed behind her. Silas looked at Kaya. She was holding the basket, her fingers tight on the handle, her eyes fixed on the door where Mrs. Harmon had disappeared. Her breath came quick and shallow. "The federal marshals," Silas said, turning to Hoke. "When exactly?" "Should be here by tomorrow, day after at the latest." Hoke sat down behind his desk. "Until then, you stay here. Both of you. I've got a back room with a cot, not much, but it's warm and it's secure. And Croft—" Hoke's face darkened. "Croft will come. He doesn't have a choice now. Those men will tell him what happened, and he'll have to respond. A man like that, he can't let people see him backed down by an old marshal and a pair of strangers. How many men does he have? 30, maybe more." Hoke leaned back in his chair. "But he won't bring them all. He's smart enough to know that bringing an army into town would give the Federals everything they need. He'll come himself, with a few men. He'll try to make this look legal, reasonable, and if he can't—" Hoke did not answer. He did not need to. The afternoon passed slowly. Kaya cleaned and bandaged Silas's ribs, bruised, not cracked, though the cut from the fall needed stitches that she applied with a needle and thread from Mrs. Harmon's basket. Silas sat still and silent through the procedure, watching her hands move with practiced efficiency. When she finished, she sat back and looked at him. "You should rest. So should you. I am not the one who fell off a cliff." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair point. He lay down on the cot in the back room, The ceiling was water-stained and cracked. Through the small window, he could see the sky turning orange as the sun began to set. Kaya sat in the chair beside the cot. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence was enough. Silas closed his eyes. Sleep came quickly, pulling him down into darkness. He woke to shouting. The room had gone dark. Night had fallen while he slept. Through the window, he could see torchlight flickering multiple torches, moving toward the marshal's office. Kaya was already on her feet, her body tense. From the front room, Hoke's voice rang out. "That's far enough. Croft." And then another voice, deeper, colder, dripping with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "Marshal Hoke, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Silas pushed himself off the cot. His ribs screamed, but he ignored them. He crossed to the doorway that separated the back room from the front and looked out. Harlan Croft stood in the street. Flanked by 6 men on horseback, torchlight played across his face broad, well-fed, with a neatly trimmed beard going gray at the edges. He wore a black coat and a silver watch chain that caught the firelight. His hands were soft, the hands of a man who had not done his own work in decades. Marshal Hoke stood on the boardwalk, his pistol still holstered, his posture loose and unhurried. "Nothing here belongs to you, Harlan," Hoke said. "Not anymore." Croft smiled. The expression did not reach his eyes. "The Apache woman is mine. I have documents, legal transfer of ownership, signed by her uncle, witnessed by a territorial judge. You want to see them? I've seen enough of your documents. Then you know I'm within my rights." Croft spread his hands, palms up. "I'm not asking for trouble, Marshal. I'm asking for what's mine. Return the woman, and we all go home." Movement behind Silas. Kaya stepped past him, through the doorway, into the front room. Her back was straight, her chin lifted. The bandages on her wrists showed white against her skin. "Kaya," Silas said. "Wait." She did not wait. She walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out onto the boardwalk beside Marshal Hoke. The men on horseback shifted. Hands moved toward rifles. Croft raised one finger, and they stilled. "There she is." Croft's smile widened. "Come along now. We're going home." Kaya did not move. She stood on the boardwalk, looking at Croft, and when she spoke, her voice carried clear across the street. "My name is Kaya, daughter of Ishta." She paused. "I was sold. I was burned. I am still here." The words hung in the air, along the boardwalk. Doors had begun to open again, the same doors that had opened that morning, the same faces peering out. Mrs. Harmon stood in the entrance of the general store, her child pressed against her skirts. The 2 old men had emerged from the saloon. A blacksmith in a leather apron stepped out of his forge, hammer still in hand. "What she is," Croft said, his smile fading. "Is property. What she says doesn't matter. What any of you say doesn't matter. The law. The law." The voice came from the far end of the street. Everyone turned. 3 riders emerged from the darkness beyond the torchlight. They wore long coats and flat-brimmed hats, and badges glinted on their chests. The man in front, tall, lean, with a face like weathered leather, reined his horse to a stop and studied Croft with eyes that held no warmth. "Federal Marshal Jennings," the man said, "out of Tucson. We got word there might be trouble here." Croft's face went pale. "This is territorial business. You have no jurisdiction. Buying and selling human beings is federal business." Jennings dismounted and walked toward Croft, his spurs jingling with each step. Has been since 65. You want to show me those documents of yours? Mr. Croft, I'd like to see them. Croft's men exchanged glances. One of them, the young rider from that morning, quietly turned his horse and began to walk it away from the group. Another followed. You're making a mistake, Croft said, but his voice had lost its confidence. He was watching his men leave, watching his power drain away. The only mistake I see, Jennings said, is you coming into this town with armed men and threatening a woman under the protection of a United States Marshal. He looked at Hoke. That's what happened here, isn't it? Hoke nodded slowly. That's what happened. Jennings turned back to Croft. Harlan Croft, you're under arrest for violation of federal law regarding the purchase and transport of human beings. You'll be held in Tucson pending trial. He gestured to his deputies. Take him. The deputies dismounted and approached Croft. For a moment, just a moment, Silas thought Croft might resist. His hand twitched toward his coat, toward the pistol that undoubtedly hung beneath it. Then he looked at the crowd, the shopkeeper in his apron, the woman with her child, the old men from the saloon, the blacksmith with his hammer. 30 faces, watching, waiting. Croft's hand dropped to his side. The deputies took his arms and led him toward the horses. He did not struggle. He did not speak. He walked with the stiff gait of a man whose world had just collapsed beneath him. Silas stepped out onto the boardwalk. He stood beside Kaya and watched Croft being lifted onto a horse, his hands bound before him. Jennings approached them. He studied Kaya for a moment, then nodded. You'll need to testify. When the trial comes, you willing to do that? Yes. Good. Jennings glanced at Silas. You the lumberjack, the one who pulled her out of that cabin. Silas nodded. Brave thing you did. Foolish, maybe, but brave. Jennings touched the brim of his hat. We'll be in touch. He mounted his horse and rode out, his deputies following with Croft between them. The torchlight faded. The hoofbeats faded. And then the street was quiet. 6 weeks later, Silas stood in the clearing outside his cabin and looked at what had changed. The herb garden was the most obvious difference. Kaya had planted it beside the door, sage and yarrow and other plants he could not name, their leaves green and full now, rustling in the afternoon breeze. Drying bundles hung from the porch rafters. The smell of them filled the air whenever he opened the door. The second chair sat on the porch beside his own. He had built it from pine, rough-hewn but sturdy. It did not match the first chair, but it fit beside it well enough. Inside, the cabin held other changes. 2 cups on the table instead of 1, a loom in the corner, simple, hand-built. The work of many days where Kaya had begun teaching him how thread became cloth, her moccasins beside his boots near the door, her herbs on his shelf, their shelf now, their cabin. The words still felt strange in his mind, but less strange each day. Silas walked inside. The afternoon light fell through the window, catching the dust motes that floated in the air. On the shelf, the photograph still lay face down where it had always been. He crossed to it, stood before it. His hand hovered over the frame. Behind him, the door opened. Kaya entered, carrying an armload of firewood. She set it beside the stove and straightened. Watching him, he picked up the photograph, turned it over. Clara's face looked back at him young, smiling, her hair pinned up the way she had worn it on their wedding day, in her arms, wrapped in a white blanket. Their son, 6 months old, eyes closed, sleeping. Silas set the photograph on the windowsill, where the light could reach it. Then he looked at the high shelf. The wooden rattle sat where it had always sat, covered in dust. He reached up and took it down. The wood was smooth beneath his fingers, worn by the hands of a child who had never grown old enough to wear it further. He found a piece of cloth clean, soft, and wrapped the rattle carefully. Then he placed it in the cedar box he kept beneath the bed, the box that held Clara's wedding ring, the box that held the lock of their son's hair, cut on the day he was born. "They deserve to be remembered," he said. His voice came out rough. "Not just hidden." Kaya had not moved from her place by the stove. She did not approach. She did not offer words of comfort. She simply watched, her eyes dark and still. Then she crossed to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. They stood together in the afternoon light, not speaking, not needing to speak. Outside, the wind moved through the ponderosas. A hawk cried somewhere over the ridge. After a while, they walked outside and sat in the 2 chairs on the porch. The sun was beginning its descent toward the rim, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "What happens now?" Kaya asked. Silas was quiet for a moment. He looked at the herb garden, at the drying plants, at the second chair he had built with his own hands. "I don't know," he said. "I ain't planned past today in a long time." "That is honest. It's all I got." Kaya turned to look at him. The light caught her face, softening the angles, warming the dark depth of her eyes. "It is enough," she said. They sat in silence. The sun continued to fall. The shadows lengthened across the clearing. "You staying?" Silas asked. Kaya did not answer immediately. She looked out at the trees, at the schema, at the cabin that had become something more than a place to hide. "I am here," she said. Silas nodded. He did not reach for her hand. He did not need to. Her presence beside him was answer enough. The sun touched the rim of the mountains and began to sink below. The air cooled. The first stars appeared in the east, faint points of light in a sky that was still more blue than black. Neither of them moved to go inside. They sat together on the porch of the cabin that was no longer his alone, watching the day end and the night begin. The silence between them was different now, not the silence of isolation, not the silence of grief, but the silence of 2 people who had found something worth staying for. In the morning, there would be work to do, wood to cut, meals to prepare, a loom to learn, a garden to tend, but that was tomorrow. Tonight, they simply sat and breathed and watched the stars come out, one by one, over the mountains they had crossed together. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Something tender, perhaps, something that does not ask to be explained. Many of us have known what it feels like to carry grief in silence, to wake each morning and move through the hours without anyone knowing what weight we hold. Some of us have been the one who needed rescue. Some of us have been the one who opened a door we had kept closed for years. And perhaps you know what it is to sit beside someone not speaking, not needing to speak and feel less alone than you have felt in a long time. These things do not need to be resolved. They are allowed to rest, just as they are. The cabin on the mountain, the 2 chairs on the porch, the stars coming out one by one. They do not ask us to understand. They only ask us to remember that we are still here, still breathing, still capable of beginning again. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.